symbol of racial justice gave hope to Europe's Jews. Hope that despite strict quotas limiting immigration, America would provide a haven from the terror of Adolf Hitler.
My mother desperately tried to get out of Austria, and because of the quota system, there were obvious difficulties. One could not gain entrance to the United States. And one possibility was to get entrance to Cuba.
Fred Reif's family joined more than 900 Jewish refugees on board the steamship St. Louis, bound for Cuba. But at Havana, Cuban officials refused to let them land.
Some suicides started to happen. I remember one person slit his wrists and jumped overboard in the harbor.
The fear is, of course, if you can't land in Cuba, then you have to go back to a concentration camp. We all knew that.
And so the St. Louis turned north towards the United States. For 5 days, the ship sat off the Florida coast while the captain appealed for refuge.
Everybody's hopes were up. Franklin Roosevelt was everybody's idol, and nothing will happen to us. America wouldn't let us down.
But the United States government did not permit them to land. The passenger sent one last urgent plea directly to President Roosevelt. There was no reply. The St. Louis had no choice but to sail back across the Atlantic. At the last minute, England, France, Holland, and Belgium agreed to take the stranded refugees. But because the war was spreading, over the next 6 years, 660 of the more than 900 passengers would perish at the hands of the Nazis. President Roosevelt was sympathetic to the plight of the refugees, but with the United States Congress in an isolationist frame of mind, he felt he could not spend political capital saving a small number of Jews when all of Europe needed help against Hitler. Roosevelt believed that the only way to stop Nazi aggression and keep America insulated from Europe's troubles was to arm Britain and France. It was not a popular idea in a country that was officially neutral. In March 1939, 6 months after the Munich Agreement, which Neville Chamberlain thought Hitler would honor, Hitler broke his promise not to make any territorial claims and took all of Czechoslovakia. And still, most Americans wanted to leave the Europeans to deal with their own crisis. America was interested in a very different future.
Sound the brass, roll the drum, to the world of tomorrow we come.
In the summer of 1939, New York was home to the World's Fair. It was called the World of Tomorrow.
Here we come, young and old.
Visitors got their first look at television.
How it worked, we did not know. I didn't ask. I was just in awe of the whole thing.
General Motors confidently offered visitors a future without traffic jams. General Electric dreams of easy living with a dishwasher.
It was as if all of the dreams of the future were suddenly going to be materialized. Machines were going to make us better people.
And here he comes, ladies and gentlemen, walking up to greet you under his own power.
It was like science fiction for me, 12 years old, waiting to see the world of tomorrow.
Come hail the dawn of a new day.
The flags of 60 nations flew over the fair. Only one major power was absent. Germany had been invited, but Hitler had declined. He had his own plan for the world of tomorrow. On the last day of August, visitors were enjoying another festive evening at the fair.
As we were approaching the Polish pavilion, the lights went out. And we didn't know whether it was an electrical problem or what? Because the rest of the fair was still lit. All of a sudden, a loudspeaker went on, and they had announced that Germany had just marched into Poland.
Suddenly, the world of tomorrow had lost its bright promise.
And here is the United Press flash from Warsaw, which says officially that German planes have bombed railway stations in 3 Polish towns.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This country is at war with Germany.
I remember the broadcaster in London saying, and I'll never forget that sentence he used, "Tonight the lights are going out all over Europe and no one knows when they'll ever come back on."
The war in Europe made Americans realize just how blessed they were. In a display of patriotism, flag sails soared. And a song by famous Jewish immigrant Irving Berlin went to the top of the hit parade.
God bless America, land that I love.
Most Americans still wanted Europe to fight its own battle, but President Roosevelt and a growing number of people knew that they had to prepare for the worst as events in Europe raged out of control. In the spring of 1940, Hitler turned his Blitzkrieg, his lightning war, against the countries of Western Europe.
I think at that time probably he was at the top point of his power. 6 weeks to beat Poland in 18 days, to occupy Norway and Denmark, to beat Holland in 5 days and Belgium in 17 days. I think those who doubted him, they then thought, oh, that man is just superb. He wins everything.
And then France fell in just 6 weeks. On June the 14th, German troops entered Paris. Even as France collapsed, German planes started to attack Britain, the last democratic stronghold in Europe. Still, the United States held back. President Roosevelt was able to help America's battered English ally with a program to lend and lease them arms.
We shall send you in ever-increasing numbers, ships, planes, tanks, guns. That is our purpose and our pledge.
But as a beleaguered Britain became freedom's last holdout in Europe, full American involvement became increasingly inevitable. In December of 1940, the first peacetime draft in American history began. America's armed forces were in woeful shape. The U.S. Army had under 200,000 men, fewer than Holland or Portugal.
I remember even running around with sticks for rifles, and we used old tomato cans from the mess hall. They got Campbell's soup cans, and they'd put gravel in them, and they'd rattle, and then we'd throw them as far as we could throw them, and that's learning how to throw a grenade.
I was in ROTC. I was studying to be an officer in the American Army. And I would look at that German war machine, and it put cold chills up and down my back. And I used to say to myself, you mean to tell me we've got to go up against those guys? It wasn't a very pretty picture.